Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, it is Sunday the 13th of November 2022. I recorded one of these a couple days ago, and for whatever reason, the video didn't work. Started recording, and then I got I got a bunch of messages coming in, and I'm not sure if it was because I got messages from italki or what, but whatever it was, stopped recording, and not only stopped recording, but it didn't even capture the video up to that point. Now, granted, most of the people who get this, most of the people who consume this, most of the people who listen to these are listening to the podcast, not to the YouTube thing. In fact, the YouTube thing has very, very low viewership. So you would think that I wouldn't give that much of a fuck, and also I don't like being on video generally. So you would think, why are you doing this? But that being the case, I'm still re-recording this one, or at least trying it over. If this doesn't work and it's just audio, I will definitely just put that one out. Don't think I'm going to go back and try to salvage the other one, but we'll see what happens here. So the thing I wanted to talk about is triggered. And it's a complicated subject because, first of all, obviously, and I used to put trigger warnings on things. Turns out that it's been studied pretty well, and it seems like, obviously you can never say something definitively, but it seems like, generally speaking, the trigger warnings are actually not helping, and they just tend to build up anxiety in people, and that anticipatory anxiety is not as bad or worse than not having them. So I stopped doing it at a certain point. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger thing. Like, it depresses the shit out of me because it seems like such a, Dunning-Kruger seems like the syndrome of our era. And yet apparently it's at least more complicated than you would think, and the effect doesn't exactly exist. Now, clearly something does, because, obviously people who don't know very much are very certain, and they're not being knowledgeable. And yet, generally speaking, if you control for things, it seems like the more people know, the more confidence they have, and there's not like a cliff where they learn a little bit and have a huge excess of confidence and then learn more, and then that drops off. Now, part of that could be that when people learn the wrong things, even as they learn more, confirmation bias is just continuing to increase their confidence. Like, they're not realizing, oh, I was wrong. That's a depressing way to look at it. I fear it may be true, but who knows? I'm going to do my IFR instrument check ride. I'm going to get back to the topic in a bit, but doing my instrument check ride Wednesday morning. And so I have my last practice flight and ground today in a few hours. So I need to eat and do some prep for that and all that. So this is a little bit time boxed, although it's like 10:15 in the morning. So I have enough time that this could be protracted and excessively long, which is what I aim for generally, I guess. I guess the thing I wanted to, I'm kind of optimistic about that. We'll see. I'm a little twinge of nervous, but I do feel like, to some extent, it's like if you're doing your PhD and you have your defense. If you get to your defense and you don't pass, you should never have had the defense scheduled. It should be almost a foregone conclusion. Now, it's not the case. Certainly people don't pass their check rides. I may not. But I do feel like if you don't, that's a sign that you probably shouldn't have had the check ride scheduled. So, I do feel like, I feel pretty confident in it, but a little anxious until it's done. We'll see. I will definitely report back sometime after that. Probably won't record another one of these before then, although when I recorded the one on the 11th, I said I wouldn't record one before also, and here I am, so who knows. Moving forward though, I wanted to get to this triggered thing, and of course, Like I said, I used to put trigger warnings on things. I no longer really do, though I try to be cognizant of, within reason, um, not saying things that are likely to trigger people with PTSD. The trouble is, of course, you to some extent can't perfectly do that. So I guess it's a trade-off. There's the cost of taking some kind of precaution, and then there's the reward for it, or the risk of not doing it. And you have to think like somebody could be, say somebody had a traumatic event with a kitten, and they see pictures of kittens, and that triggers them. Completely reasonable thing. It does happen. It sounds like I'm like joking, but I'm sure there's somebody who has a PTSD response from seeing a kitten. Who knows what the story is, but I'm sure that exists. Now, I think it's important to try to accommodate people, but at the same time, do you try to avoid every possible trigger, or do you try to warn people for everyone? Probably not. So you have to kind of cut the line someplace. Probably, there are certain things where, and I am generally of the opinion that most things can be discussed. Most things can even be joked about. I'm probably not the one to joke about a lot of things. There are subjects that I wouldn't broach, and there are certainly things like, racism. I feel is pretty serious. Anti-Semitism. Probably not going to joke about that. I do occasionally do like faux sexist jokes. Should I? Should I not? Arguably not. But I feel like there is like I'm clear enough that I'm not meaning those things, and also when I'm doing it, I'm making fun of the people who do. But there's an argument to be made, that I shouldn't do that either. But at the same time, I think you have to kind of, to some extent, live your life. And this actually, there's an interesting parallel here between the risk of getting somebody sick and the cost of wearing a mask. And I would personally say, this is why you need good testing and good surveillance. Surveillance is, the testing would be the measuring the stuff, and then the surveillance would be the, not just measuring it, but putting it into a system and knowing a lot of people are sick, a lot of people are spreading something or not. That kind of system should exist, because then we can go, okay, things are very prevalent right now, wear a fucking mask. Or you go, okay, well, actually things are pretty cool, no need to wear a mask. If you want to, I'm not going to complain, but you don't really need to. We should have that system, and it should just be, as a matter of public health, a thing that exists all the time. If you're sick, you should always wear a fucking mask if you're going out, period. Especially if, it's different if you're sick in a way that's not airborne or contagious in that way. But if you have a respiratory illness, you should just be wearing a fucking mask. Hard stop, if you're going out at all. And ideally, work would be set up so that, and in fact, it should be mandatory paid sick time for everybody. And if you're sick, you don't come into work. And it's not even a question. And it's mandatory in the sense that you don't have a choice and your employer doesn't have a choice. So it's not like, oh, I feel sick, but I'm still going to come in and, no, sorry. Now you can work from home if you want, but you're like hell, you're coming in. You're definitely not. And this has been studied as well. And it seems pretty clear there that the cost of paying people who are sick not to come in is far, 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 repeat that like 30 more times, less than the cost of them coming in, getting a bunch of other people sick, and then costing them productivity. Not that everything has to be measured in some kind of like accountable way, but just from the simple kind of like neoliberal consensus, balance sheet way, if somebody's sick, they should not come to work, period, hard stop. It's just clear. Now, with the masking, and the thing about that is, and the reason I still generally do it, if you are, whether you're sick or not, and I think it's important to, like the context here, COVID is still the third leading cause of death in the United States. after heart disease and cancer. Now, heart disease and cancer are somewhat preventable. Um, you could get unlucky and still get either one, but generally speaking, there are certainly public health measures that can be taken to reduce the risk. There are things that you can do in your life to reduce the risk, and so on. But they're very hard. They're in order to really dramatically reduce the incidence of either one of these, it's it's a very challenging thing to effectively eliminate. I mean, sometimes you'll have like little breakout infections and things are going to happen. But to completely eliminate the third leading cause of death literally would just take people testing and doing trace and isolate and wearing a fucking mask, and you pretty much wipe out the third leading cause of death. Now, in terms of like effort versus like cost benefit and all of this, it is a fucking no-brainer. It is such a fucking clear thing. You should absolutely wear a goddamn mask. Period. Hard stop. And also, like, even if you're not personally concerned for yourself, which the evidence is that we should be, like, even if you have a minor infection and you get multiple ones, the risk of having long COVID, having sequela from it, goes up each time. And even if you have a mild infection, you can have long-term consequences from that. But let's just say you know you're going to be fine. You absolutely have no doubt you will be okay. And not only that, you're not even going to end up accidentally killing a friend or a family member. You know that somehow. Now, obviously impossible to know, but let's just say somehow you do. If you get infected and you spread that shit, absolutely, and when I say this, I mean like with almost complete certainty, like 99.999% confidence, you are going to be part of a chain of infection that could have been stopped if you didn't get infected. And that chain of infection is not just going to kill one person, it's going to kill multiple people. Now, to me, it seems like a pretty clear, it's like, okay, you wear a fucking mask and you don't kill somebody a couple steps down. Doesn't seem like a very hard thing. And whatever the R naught is of the particular strain that you get, it doesn't take that many hops to kill a lot of people. It's just exponential growth. It's kind of the nature of it. So it seems like a no-brainer to me. What do I know? It just disgusts me that this is a thing that, and also like people, every time, I've only traveled a few times since the pandemic, gone to the airport, other than flying myself. And the only times I've gone on a commercial flight for business or whatever, or I should say every time I've done it, there have been at least a handful of people in the airport who were visibly sick with respiratory and symptoms, so like coughing and like clearly sick in ways that could very easily be COVID, and not fucking masking. So I get like, okay, somehow you can't cancel your flight, you can't stay longer, you can't do whatever. Wear a fucking mask. Like how this is even a debate, how this is even something, you should be, the social consequences for being sick, like obviously you can't blame somebody for being sick. That's fine. But for being sick and not taking any kind of mitigating action to at least try to keep other people from getting sick, especially when you know that what you might have, or very likely have, is the third leading cause of death. And if you're in a public place, you're going to get a lot of people sick. It's very contagious. And even if none of them directly get sick, they're going to get somebody else sick who's going to die. Thanks to you. It's just inexcusable. And it's a fucking problem that kind of thing. I always am obsessed with this, but we had at one point like the scarlet letter, horrible, excessive shame. And somehow that pendulum has swung so far that like Mitch McConnell and Kirsten Sinema and just the absolute wretches of the earth Harvey Weinstein, I lump all of these three people together. All of them can go about their lives and basically face no consequences. And Now, granted, eventually Weinstein had to go to prison, but right before he went to prison, he was out at comedy clubs. And when some comedian called him out and said some shit about it, he was there with a crowd of people. And she got ejected, not him. This is like, you know, we're a little, the pendulum has gone too far the other way. So, anyway, getting back to this triggered thing. I, on election day, posted something on LinkedIn. And what I did was say basically, regardless of the outcome, fuck Kari Lake, fuck Peter Thiel, and fuck Blake Masters. Maybe, I think, flipping the last two. The order was a little bit off, but you know, I said this. And then they give you metrics on the post. 8 or 9 people saw it, and I got reported for, what was it? It was either like harassment or bullying. That was actually it. Harassment or bullying. Now, I will tell you, fuck is a relatively strong word to some people. To me, it's no big deal. But I get that some people are bothered by it. But I looked at the terms of service. In there, the only thing it says about strong language is basically an allowance for it. Within reason. It's not like you can use like the N word. You're not probably doing that. But there's an allowance for it. Now, bullying and harassment are real things. These are real fucking problems. People face these things. And the reason that it's in there as a form of moderation is to protect people. So, as far as I'm concerned, you're making whoever did this, making a false accusation of something that is real, and you're diminishing the meaning and significance of these real things by using it to try to silence somebody who said something you didn't like. And frankly, saying fuck Masters, Thiel, and Lake, that should just be the standard. You know, this is again with the shame. The idea that someone as horrible as Lake can come out, and maybe she's just completely cynical and everything she says is just like a fucking pigeon in a Skinner box pressing a button. Like maybe there's no logic behind it beyond just, oh, I press this button and I get a good response for it. Maybe that's all it is. I don't give a fuck. Whatever it is, the fact that she comes out and says this shit and people, like, I mean, whether she wins or loses, it's so fucking close, you know? And also, like, if she does lose, please fucking Arizona Democratic Party, I know you're not gonna watch this or listen to me, but don't take this as an indication that Katie Hobbs was the right candidate or that her fucking horrible ad campaign showing a bunch of I'm a registered Republican and I'm still voting for Katie Hobbs because Kari Lake is horrible. No, fuck you. That is not the fucking angle. That is not helping. And the thing that annoys me about this shit is that these motherfuckers are doing, like, it is an uncontrolled experiment. And they're basically saying, like, okay, the approach in Arizona is this. And they're sitting there and sort of thinking about it, and they have this idiotic toy model that does not correlate to reality. And their approach is just like, oh, okay, we're gonna do 2 things. One, we're going to try to advance the worst candidates on that side so that we can appeal to Republicans. And 2, we're going to really do everything in our messaging to appeal to Republicans. Fuck you motherfuckers. Honestly. I notice I'm saying fuck a lot. I'm sorry. It's, I'm just, you know, I'm annoyed is all. So this is not the fucking angle. The angle is we're better. We're actually like, these are the things that we stand for. These are the things that you stand for can't just be like you're not a Republican or you're like the old school Republican or you're like Republican light. This is an idiotic thing. And it also basically tells people like me to fuck off. Because I've been registered, I'm currently registered as no party preference. Kind of out of protest, but I'm still effectively like, you know, I've never voted for a Republican. I've voted consistently in every election. I was registered as a Democrat from the point where I could register until getting really upset with the party for basically fucking over Bernie and other things, but that one really got me. And, you know, you sort of sit there and you're like, okay, we don't want you who is consistently going to vote for us. And also, you know, part of their logic is like, oh well, you're not. Who the fuck are you gonna vote for? This is like if you're black or if you're gay or if you're any other category in LGBTQ, etc. or anything, the Democratic Party's premise, their whole fucking messaging to you is, who else are you gonna vote for? And this is not a good fucking angle. This is a terrible, because at a certain point, people are going to sit there and they're going to go like, well, okay, and it's horrible also for me because every fucking cycle, I do vote for, like I voted for Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs is a despicable, horrible person. There are signs up around me that have like twice convicted racist pointing to Katie Hobbs' signs. Now, she wasn't convicted of racism. She was convicted of racial discrimination. Not exactly the same thing, but it's a real, like, it's a fucking thing. And think about how bad you have to be as a Democrat to not be like a slam dunk on the racist issue relative to a fucking Republican. This is terrible. This is fucking horrible. And, I mean, so just right there, like, Biden has, I mean, go back to the Daily Show thing, the Audacity of the Grope. I think it was like from 2015 or so. And it's showing all the ways where he's like super creepy and like doing that weird, puts his hands on people's shoulders and sniffs their hair and just was creepy as fuck. And you run this motherfucker against Trump. Now, Trump is horrible. Trump is probably a rapist. And yet, you ran fucking Biden. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know if you can hear this. I can hear myself now for some reason coming through my computer in the other room with a delay, and it is driving me mad. I'm going to keep going and ignore that. But, hopefully the audio is still recording and everything is in proper order. I don't know why this started playing. I don't know why the monitor wasn't on before and it's on now. Whatever it is, something is wrong. But you run fucking Biden against Trump. I mean, you should be able to imagine how bad you have to have a candidate where, in terms of racism or sexism or whatever metric you want, they're not a clear slam dunk against Carrie Lake or Donald Trump. This is fucking insane. It's horrible. And the worst thing is also you have people like me who you're telling to go fuck themselves because it's like, who else are you going to vote for? You're telling me to go fuck myself, and you know that I'm going to vote for the motherfucker, but it doesn't make me feel good. And I'll tell you, at a certain point, I'm seriously just going to give up my citizenship and get the fuck out of the country because I can't stand it. I cannot take it anymore having to vote for fucking Katie Hobbs. I voted for her. I think she's a despicable, horrible person. I could give you a list of reasons. Now, the racial discrimination thing is pretty fucking bad. One thing that bothers me also is that, she was there at the announcement of the overturning of Roe, the Hobbs decision. Not the announcement, but, like we got the leak. She was there, gave a speech. A bunch of other people gave a speech. And the difference was their speeches were actually coming from the heart. They were actually very clearly pro-abortion and pro-reproductive rights. Whereas she was just like this cynical politician who's like, okay, well, a lot of people seem to care about this, so I'm just going to go and say this. And then goes and says shit like, these bans go too far. Now, you may not be bothered by that, but the thing that bothers me about that is it's not that these bans go too far. It's there should not be any bans. Period. Hard stop. She's coming from the premise that bans are okay. It's just like, it's maddening to me. I could go on. The one also that gets me, and this kind of fucked her, and it predictably fucked her, but they have this thing where they do these, like in the primary for Secretary of State, she didn't even personally file this. Somebody who's attached to her campaign filed this, but basically sued at the last minute to remove Leslie Pico from, and yeah, is Leslie Pico fine? Or I like her, she's a nice person. a little bit into the crypto stuff, which kind of like irks me, but I think I would very much happier, I would have been very much happier to vote for her as Secretary of State than Katie Hobbs. There were a couple other people, and they used this kind of stuff, and then you talk to the fucking Democrats about it, and they're like, well, that's just the game, that's just how the game is played. Like, fuck you, that's how the game is played. There should be almost no threshold. I mean, there are so many things wrong with the system that we have for electing people. One of them is that it's so hard to get on the ballot. Now, you should have some kind of threshold. There should be some barrier to it. It shouldn't be just like you have to go and, okay, you file some paperwork and now you're one of the 50 other people running for Senate. It shouldn't be that way. But it should be reasonable. It should be something where you could be a normal person and you spend a few weekends going out collecting signatures, and you can be, even on a statewide ballot, you should be able to do that. This is one reason why, like, you have these horrible like CDs in Arizona where the Democrats didn't even run a candidate. Now, granted, you're probably going to lose because they're very skewed Republican, but run a fucking candidate. Like, years ago, I think it was CD8 at the time, there was no Democratic candidate. The Green candidate got 30% of the vote. I think maybe even more. And the reason they did is because people didn't want to vote for the fucking Republican, but they had nobody else to vote for. How do you just... And then they dump so much money and time and effort into these other races. Try. Fucking try. Like, if you look at my district, CD5, Andy Biggs's district, Javier Ramos was in my district running, and he got a decent fucking chunk of the vote. You can do well. People need something, and you could probably win. Probably, like, just do some fucking work and you could win. So anyway, it annoys the shit out of me that they don't do this. It annoys the shit out of me that they just basically, and also, like, this election, one of the reasons that it wasn't a red wave is that a lot of younger people voted. The thing is, those younger people feel like me, and they don't want to fucking vote for Joe Biden or Katie Hobbs or these horrible people. And they also want free fucking college, as we should have. They want universal healthcare, as we should fucking have. They want all the things that the rest of the world gets, and the air quotes best country in the world can't do somehow. And the party just basically tells them to fuck themselves. Similarly, like, you look at Georgia, you have a ton of black people coming out and voting and working so hard to get a senator. And then the Democrats are like, well, basically fuck you with the voting rights. We're just going to keep going the way we do. And, who else are you going to vote for? That's their whole fucking premise. It's like, stop that shit. Listen to the people who are voting for you consistently and do the fucking shit that would take to represent them. How is that a hard thing? How is that a thing that is not just a given? Like, it's just infuriating. So, getting back to this triggered thing, I posted this thing on LinkedIn. I've had, I have a certain amount of, like, energy to get out there and say stuff, and not being on Twitter, yeah, it's like the thing, actually, this is a weird analogy, but you have the people who either they're raised not being able to say the word fuck, or they're raised with, like, weird taboos about sex. And so I always look at that as, like, you have a certain amount of something, and you're trying to, like, hold it in your hand. And at a certain point, the more you squeeze it in, you're not gonna get rid of it. It just starts, like, leaking between your fingers, right? So it's why you get people who come from super religious backgrounds, and it's why you get the loophole, for example. It's why it's like, well, you can't have vaginal intercourse. Can't have sex that way because that is totally prohibited. But we can do the back door or whatever else. This is why you got fucking armpit crabs in Utah, because people are so, like, suppressed, and they still have that energy to do something, and then they start like, well, let's just have armpit sex because that's technically it's fucking insane. Just don't be an idiot. is what I'm saying. But anyway, coming back, I'm using, it's weird that I'm using my not being on Twitter and having to post stuff on Instagram and LinkedIn as comparable to somebody having a weird taboo about sex and then having armpit sex. Make of that what you will. But getting back, I have that energy. I've been posting stuff on LinkedIn and Instagram a little bit. And on LinkedIn, I posted this thing. Somebody who was frankly triggered, which is funny because I guarantee whoever did it, just like Musk, they're sitting there like, oh, we're all for free speech. But as soon as he gets Twitter and opens up the verification to anyone, he starts going like, well, free speech is free, or what is it? Speech is free. Free speech is, comedy is legal on Twitter. That was one of the things he said. Now, and then, well, if Kathy Griffith, who I'm not a huge fan of, but she was okay here. If she wants to change her name on Twitter to Elon Musk and make fun of me, that's gonna get a permaban. That's gonna, you're just like out for life because comedy is legal on Twitter. The fucking asshole motherfucker. So anyway, I'm on LinkedIn. I post this thing, which again, maybe not the most diplomatic thing. I even said at the beginning, like, because this is a professional network and all of this, I have to be much more diplomatic than I normally would. I prefaced it with that. And then I said, fuck Blake and fuck Masters. I think it's the same guy, isn't it? Fuck Masters and fuck Lake and fuck Thiel, who incidentally also, Peter Thiel, this is a dude who is a billionaire. And imagine you have all these resources, like the Kochs, but you have all these resources and you're going to devote your life and a ton of your fortune to fucking people over and trying to get people as shitty as Masters and Lake elected. And come within fucking striking distance, incidentally. So, anyway, coming back, I posted this thing, somebody got triggered. And it's funny because I wouldn't normally make fun of people for getting triggered, but in this case, it's one of these people who's like super into free speech. I don't know who it was, but I know it's like one of these fucking Republican people who are going like, oh, speech is free, and then they're making fun of people for being triggered. And that same motherfucker saw this and was like, oh no, you can't do that. I'm going to make a false report of, and I know I'm weird here, but I give a shit about honor, and I know like most people don't care. It's like, oh, it's just a false accusation. Who gives a shit? To me, you are besmirching my honor by making a false accusation. You're also undermining all the people who legitimately have, like they're facing harassment, they're facing abuse, they're facing this kind of stuff that you're reporting. And so you're just a disgusting, despicable fucking piece of shit person by doing this. Period, hard stop. So they do this, and then it's like, well, nobody can see your post now because this is what LinkedIn said. And then I fucking appealed. I was like, no, this does not violate your TOS. I did not harass anyone. I'm not targeting abuse to anyone or whatever the two things were. And they're like, yep, no, we looked, and yep, totally does, violates our TOS. Like, it disgusts. I hate moderation on these things because they're so bad. It's not that I hate moderation is good and important, and I wish there was better moderation. But like on Twitter, you would get all these horrible racist, sexist, harassment, any kind of abuse that you want, any kind of like horrible shit. That stuff would just slide. And then the same system for moderation would be abused by people who would just make targeted reports of somebody they didn't like and then get them taken down. And it's just like, it completely undermines the point of having moderation, and the system is just dumb and fucked. So anyway, I'm very bothered by this. I posted something else afterwards, taking some screenshots, and that has not been taken down, so yeah, good fucking consistency there. Anyway, I'm just annoyed. I do think, like, I got somebody who replied to that, and they're like, well, this is a professional network, and we should really not have politics introduced into professionalism, and people want to... I gotta tell you what, this is not the way things should be. Because when you have something that is seriously aberrant, And like people making false accusations about electoral fraud or any of these things, those people need to be called out. They need, if somebody's supporting Kari Lake, they need to be mocked and derided because these are horrible people, and you should not just be able to get away with not facing social consequences for doing and advocating horrible things. And it's because you don't, because you're being polite. Because similarly, like if you, there's this weird taboo in the workplace about sharing people's salary. Don't tell people how much you make. You have this kind of thing, and then the consequences, of course, people don't know, and you have vast disparities in terms of how much people are making, and it's super unfair and uncool and all this. It's the same thing. There should not be, if you open that up, it fixes that. If you speak about shit like this, if you talk about how bad, it is one of the reasons why I feel like a need to talk about how bad Katie Hobbs is. And Kyrsten Sinema. And frankly, like Mark Kelly, on the standard of these other candidates, he is above and beyond. Like, he's amazing. He's fucking great. But on an absolute spectrum, he's a piece of shit too. And the way that he got there, the fact that he didn't face anyone in the primary twice, it's horrible. This is not the way things should be. He should not be a senator. Now, he's infinitely, infinitely better than Blake, than Masters, or whatever the fuck his name is. He's infinitely better than Hobbs. He's infinitely better than Biden, and infinitely better than Sinema. And he's, you know, like, but the thing is, it's like, infinitely better here is there's a pool of festering, smoldering shit boiling below you. And he's just like above it a little bit. He's not in the bowl of shit. He's not in the smoldering crock of shit. And that makes him better. But there's so much better above that. And you have, so, like, it just annoys me. I would feel less bad about having to vote for him if there was a primary and he won the primary. That would be a good thing. And it just annoys me. It's like, it disgusts me. It also disgusts me, of course, that like you look at the state and how many people, like he won for sure, but the margin was not infinite. It was not complete, right? And it wasn't like there were a couple percent of people who were, a lot of this state is horrible. Yeah, they need to, they need some work. They need to do some serious soul searching. Anyway, I don't want to go on for too much longer, and I do have a bunch of stuff that I have to do. Even though it's Sunday, I have a lot of studying and prep to do, and I have Japanese again tomorrow, so I need to study for that. And it's like a lot of stuff. It's weird how many things that I have, like, I guess everything in my life pretty much is my own doing. Like all these projects that I'm working on, I've decided, like, I could not learn Japanese, or not try to learn a little bit of Japanese. I could not be flying. I could, and that would save a lot of money and time, and yet there's something about me that makes me just always itching to do stuff like that. Like, why? I don't know. I'm not complaining. It's just kind of a weird thing. I will say one thing actually also. This is going to be the end of this, but I have these Rode microphones, mic packs, and they worked really well for the conversation I had with Gil. Gil was happy with that too, so I'm glad to hear that. But it worked well. I liked it, but at the same time, compared to what I was using before, the SurePack, granted, the mic is a little bit smaller, but that one is a nicer, higher quality condenser mic. There's just, the sound is not great. So I may go back, or I may try to find something else. I do strongly not recommend getting these. It was a few $100 for the pack of 2 and the receiver, and the audio quality is not great, and the fact that their software is terrible is just not. And their customer service seems nice. They're trying to help. They're like, hey, why don't you send us the raw files and we can just convert them to, like, I'm not really into that, you know? I'm going to put this out, but I don't want you to have the raw file from it. It's just like gross and embarrassing. I don't know why, it bothers me. I don't like it. Anyway, we'll figure that out. But definitely my review on these Rode things is do not get the fucking pieces of shit. Okay, with that, thank you. And I hope this one actually records. I hope the audio thing that's going on in there is not bad because it's freaking me out. There's something like if you're recording yourself and you have the headset on and you can, or a monitor or whatever, and you can hear it, that's really useful, shockingly useful. It's very, it's one of the things, like I'm not wearing a headset when I'm recording these, but I think the fact that I spent so much time doing it kind of closed the loop and dialed my speech in a little bit. I still think this audio would be better if I was listening to it that way. But when you have a delay, and especially like this is a couple second delay, like a second and a half, that's bad. I think there's something like it has to be more than say 50, 100 milliseconds, or if it's less than a few seconds, then that's like the range of being horrible and distracting. After a certain point, it's like so far back that you don't even feel like it's you. It doesn't feel like an echo. And before that, your brain is not able to perceive the difference between that and actually being contemporaneous. Although I will say, I watched this thing on YouTube, and I've been falling off a little bit, but the Marble Machine X, Wintergatan. And the guy who's doing this thing is like talking about like precise timing, and he really cares about cutting off the milliseconds of deviation. And what was crazy there is he's showing these things like, what does it sound like when you have a millisecond or 5 milliseconds or 10 or 20 milliseconds of skew? And the thing that was like stunning was, frankly, even a millisecond you could hear. Like basically what he did is have a staccato and like the sound of one marble dropping and hitting, boom. And he took that sound and he skewed it by literally just 1 millisecond, and it was perceivable. I was sort of surprised by how much. Now, granted, if it was a millisecond or two or even several delay, it wouldn't be this distracting. It's the fact that it's in that horrible sweet zone that, is just like off-putting. Like, let's try this. Almost 3 seconds. Check. It is 3 seconds. So order of 3 seconds, still definitely very distracting. And if it was 500 milliseconds, I think I could live with it. But the fact that like the whole time that I'm recording this, I'm hearing myself coming from the other room. And when I first started hearing it, I was agitated and talking loud enough and saying enough that I could hear a voice and I couldn't tell it was me. And then I started like pausing a little bit and listening, and it was like, what the fuck is going on? So anyway, I will fix that and do something else next time. As always, thank you very much for listening or watching, and 再见.